I'd like to welcome you all again to Culturati Live. This is Perform and Transform NXP's journey to an unstoppable culture. And there's a little play on words there, which we'll get into. I'm Misty Wild, COO of Culturati. Our community gathers to discuss many things, chief among them the intersection of culture, leadership, and innovation, which NXP provides a perfect example of all three. Joining us today are Chris Jensen and Dana Larsen, who have already contributed a rich body of work to our thought leadership, and we are excited to partner with them more closely moving into 26. Chris is Chief People Officer and Executive Vice President of NXP Semiconductors. He is responsible for all aspects of the company's global human resources function, the company's people strategy, and fostering an inclusive culture to achieve NXP's business objectives. Chris has been with NXP since the merger with Freescale in 2015 and was integral to the cultural integration of the two companies. He has extensive experience in leading the various functions across human resources with strength in change management, compensation and benefits design, as well as mergers and acquisitions. Prior to Freescale, Chris held executive human resource positions at Applied Materials and Tandem Computers. Chris also serves as an adjunct professor at Baylor University, which I did not know, go Bears, teaching in their executive MBA program. He is a board member of Wonders and Worries, which provides children and teens free professional support during a parent's serious illness. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Organizational Behavior from the University of San Francisco and graduated Beta Gamma Sigma with his MBA from Baylor University. He is an avid scuba diver with his son and daughter. Dana Larsen is the Vice President of Global Talent and Organizational Development. Dana joined NXP in 2024 to lead global talent and organization development with nearly 30 years of experience across the technology, energy, and aerospace industries. He has held internal and external consulting and functional leadership roles, specializing in organizational assessment, leadership development, team and group effectiveness, innovative learning programs, and strategic planning and execution. Dana's approach to organizational development emphasizes the power of objective assessment to guide meaningful organizational improvement and transformation. He holds a Master of Science in Industrial Organizational Psychology from San Jose State University. And NXP is at the center of one of the most important shifts in technology today, the rise of AI at the edge, which I was just sharing with the team. I had the opportunity to experience firsthand at Harvard Shine Summit. When we were preparing for this session, our wonderful wizard behind the scenes, Annie, was coming up with graphics, and she had one on edge computing. And I thought, this is really, I think, too technical. But having seen it in action, which the case study was coffee beans in Africa, and this little tiny microcomputer, little tiny camera was able to judge the quality and fair price for these beans for farmers and others who are off the grid, and really help contribute to a more equitable world for all, which is something that's very important to us here at Culturati. So I'd like to begin with that, actually. Chris, let's start with the market context. Can you ground us in what AI at the edge actually means and why it's such a game changer?
Yeah, thanks, Misty, and on behalf of Dana and myself, thanks for the opportunity to spend some time today with the team. I don't think I need to explain to everyone the and convince you, right, about the disruptive change that AI is bringing. I think we all see that. We see that in our work lives. We're starting to see that also in our our personal lives. The way we think about it here at NXP is that AI is that next disruptive change. Frankly, no different than the disruptive change we've all experienced when we started getting these mobile devices many years ago. That change that we've all experienced when the internet became so widely used and adopted around the world. That's when we know that this autonomous future is starting to become really a reality and a new reality for all of us to experience. And it's moving at a pace that is super fast, right? So you think about the speed at which autonomy and AI at the edge is coming forward. It's really fast. And maybe Dana, you can go forward one more slide here, and in fact go one more after this. The way we think about it, or the way we want to look at it, is the different ways in which you have AI starting to impact our lives. There's this idea of perceptive AI, right, which could be things with security cameras from object detection or some sort of speech recognition. There's the generative AI, probably what most of us are starting to experience in daily work life, right, where we're having Copilot help us generate text. Or there's other coding, software coding tools that are now available in the marketplace, where a software engineer gets generative assistance to actually to develop software code, right? And then you start to get to agentic AI, right, which deals in really the decisions being made at the edge. And Dana, if you go forward one more, the way we think about it is that the expansion of AI is really driven by three factors. First is the demand for real-time performance. Second is the challenge of constantly transferring enormous amounts of data between the edge and the cloud. And third, and probably most importantly to us as we start to see these AI devices operate around us, is reliability. And for us at NXP, what that means is safety and security. And so what we're going through, and the way we're thinking about AI, is, as a semiconductor company, we've for years, 50 years in fact, we've had fabulous innovative products. We've had innovative products that impact each of our lives on a daily basis. But what we're also seeing is that it's not just the what we would call the hardware silicon wafer or silicon chip that really underpins what happens from an AI standpoint. It's going to require that real-time performance, that low power consumption, safety and security, an AI accelerator. And when you start to bundle all that together and then allow a customer, for us, a customer would be someone in factory automation or medical devices, energy systems, an automobile company, or even security systems. When you bundle all that together and you deliver it to a customer, they then put their application software, as you see in this picture, on top of it. That then drives the need for us as a company to not just do great products. We're a great product company, but actually to transition from a product company to a systems company, because we need to deliver to our customers all of these tools so they can then do, like you were just describing, how do you have something that goes out into a coffee field, looks at a bean, and makes a decision there without communicating to the cloud about that bean? Is it in the state that it should be picked? And if so, then you can start going through your process. And think about that when you think about factory automation, you think about autonomous driving, and you think about all the other devices that are going to start coming online around us as we go forward. And so that's how we at NXP really are thinking about this AI at the edge, in these edge devices, separate from what you see with other companies like NVIDIA, or you see with Amazon, where they're dealing with AI in the cloud. We're dealing with AI in the device that sits right next to you as a consumer, and impacts your work life and your daily personal life. And that's probably the difference that we start to see.
So you mentioned systems, kind of switching to a systems view. How else has this AI at the edge shifted expectations for NXP?
Well, I think for our customers, what they're expecting for us to now do for them is to deliver not just the silicon, but they want us to deliver what we call a software foundation. And that started to change how we work at NXP. And frankly, when I think about our workforce and the workforce we have internally, we've now need to start getting different skill sets within our workforce. So we're on a journey today where we now are starting to create an enormous population of software engineers, where historically most semiconductor companies have predominantly hardware engineers. The other change that starts to bring is we need to start thinking from a customer system perspective. So our customers want to make sure that we understand how is the application going to be used, and therefore we create capabilities from an overall architecture standpoint for them, supporting them from a hardware, software, safety, security, and enablement perspective, as opposed to in the past, we would just give them a chip and say, here you go, you all figure out what you're going to do with it and turn it into whatever your product is. to some extent, we're now moving upstream in that system with our customers.
And how, as your role as CHRO, how do you connect those technological and industry shifts?
Well, I think, and Dana, maybe you can go one forward. What we now start to think about internally to NXP is communicating clearly a different direction for the company. So we've come up with this, what you see at the top of the slide here, we've come up with this view of needing to get our workforce to understand the importance of creating what we call a North Star. So a North Star is not what we're going to be in 2026. It's probably not where we're going to be in 2030, but it's that long-term view of for us, as you see here, about being unstoppable at bringing those intelligent systems to the edge in the markets that we serve. And for us, that's automotive and industrial and IoT. And then from there, we then talk about with our team members across the company, what are the transformation steps that we need to move? What are the transformation moves we need to put in play to ultimately achieve that North Star? Because it is so far out. And today, if you ask me, say, well, Chris, how much of NXP's revenue actually comes from this idea of doing this full systems? I would tell you it's a few percent. It's a few percent. The majority of our revenue still comes from components. But we know over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we have to make that pivot. And we have to start today from just the component company and getting our team to understand strategically how do we make decisions and investments to move towards a systems company away from just a component company.
Got it. And I see more people joining us. Welcome if you're just signing on. In the chat here, you're welcome to drop questions. We are going to reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes for a designated Q&A, and I'll try to monitor throughout as well. But just so that we can get a sense of who is in the room and how this is applicable, if you could please drop in your industry and or role, I think that will help frame how we're talking about this next bit as regards to talent. Chris, anything else on that? Or Dana, did you want to go into adaptation as leaders and teams?
Sure. I mean, I think Chris said it well in terms of the technological challenge that's in front of us and what it is meant for us as a traditional hardware company. It is a sea change, and I don't want to make it be all about NXP, and because the whole industry is really adapting to this sea change and where our customers are going. And if you really think about the demand and the requirements of these devices going forward, we expect them to do much more than we ever did in the past. They have to make decisions on their own. It really is a significant challenge. And when it comes to people and talent, then now you need to start talking about individuals rising to that challenge, whether they be people we already have, whether it be individuals that we may hire in the future, whether they're people that we're training, leaders that we're trying to bring up as the best possible leaders inside of this new environment. It has implications for many, many different talent processes. And so I think it would be useful to talk about some of the elements that we've discovered as challenges, and also some of which come about as a part of this technological shift, some of which just comes about as from normal business and needing to continue. I mean, the analogy of having to rebuild the plane while it's flying is exactly what it is that we're dealing with when we say perform and transform. We have to stay performative, right? We have to continue to meet the needs of our current customers while also keeping this eye on this future and gradually bringing in those technologies and integrating them and adapting them. And the speed at which that's happening is just it is remarkable, and it's going to require remarkable people to do it. And I believe we have a lot of those remarkable people already in our organization, but I also believe that we're discovering where the gaps are as we go. And like I said, there are also a variety of other factors that play here. Um, but the way we're thinking about talent, we call it our DNA, right? We talk about the people and what they bring to the table in terms of how we rise to those challenges, and we have a set of values that guide our behavior overall. So it's not about knowing how to behave or what we should be focused on. I think for the most part, these things are very well grounded inside of NXP's culture. Um, However, what we discover as we start contemplating that future state is that we begin to understand where maybe the culture begins to work against us. Even elements of our culture that we're very proud of might even start to work against us. And I'll use an example of, you can, if a key tenet of your culture is to be very focused around zero errors, and in some applications that's absolutely required, right, to be zero errors. Um, but if you're applying that standard to every product, even products that don't require it, all you're doing is slowing yourself down, and your ability to execute becomes problematic, right? It really does. So I want to point to a couple of things that we have identified. Well, a couple of things that have just happened, and then other things that we have identified along the way. So the first thing that I'll talk about is, we, at the very same time we're going through this dramatic shift in our industry, we are undergoing a transition of leaders. Our president and CEO has shifted. The announcement was made that that transition would start back in April. So for the last few months, we've been really dealing with. And if you've ever been through that process of having a significant shift at the very top of your organization, you know that that can throw an organization into some turmoil. Not because individuals are struggling with the idea that there's a new leader, but with that leader come new expectations, a new point of view, new an overall way of working is different. So people have to adapt to those expectations. And the way we look at it, however, is that this is an opportunity. I mean, having a leadership transitioning at the very same time that we are undergoing these massive shifts and the need to do things differently, it really does provide you with a window. Earlier, Chris used the analogy of kind of riding the wave, in the wake of that change, really being able to propel you, kind of forward in other areas that you need to change. So I recall from the time that the announcement was made back in April, I would start to get, I myself and other members of the team would start to get these notes from Chris as Chris was sitting in these meetings with our new president. He would be listening for these cues, right? The cues of, where are we headed as an organization? What are those expectations going to be? Where's the focus going to be? And I think over the course, I don't remember exactly how long it was, but probably over a month or two, I think we had compiled a list of, 30 or 40 descriptives that we had heard from our new president's mouth. And surprisingly, how accurate and how important those words have been when we've gone to do some additional assessment around our culture, which I'll talk about in a second. Another key challenge, I won't characterize it as a challenge, but more as a learning, is that our current culture reflects our accumulated experience. So we have to recognize and honor the fact that culture has gotten us to where we are. There's a lot of goodness here, right? And the tendency when we talk about culture and culture change is to talk about culture very in the big sense of culture. And that's a bit overwhelming. I think it's overwhelming for the organization. It doesn't recognize or honor the contributions of the past. And so we're trying to be very careful about and very targeted to inspire evolution in those areas where it's most needed. And again, I'll talk about how we figure that out in a second, but because our goal is to operationalize and target very specific elements of our culture that need to change, not the culture as a whole.
Mm.
And I think as culture change goes, I think that's a very important principle. Because otherwise you're really boiling the ocean when you say we need a change of organizational culture. It really has to be operationalized and defined.
Can you give us a little more on that? Why you describe culture as needing to evolve rather than be fixed?
Yeah, because again, there's a couple of challenges. If you start to talk about fixing things, then what you're doing is you're characterizing the current state as a problem to solve, right? And while certainly there are challenges and we do need to move to a different way of working, when you use that kind of language, you've got standard bearers in the organization that are very, very proud. They've got long history with this organization. And quite frankly, their skills are absolutely critical to our go forward execution. And so the emphasis here should be on again honoring what it is we've where we've arrived, while also recognizing that that evolution is necessary. So it's a bit like the old, it is sufficient, or it's necessary but insufficient, right?
Mm.
We say that our current culture has a lot of the elements we want to continue, but it's insufficient on its own. So we've got to look at some adaptation.
So, how do you balance that need to move fast with not losing those lessons from the past?
Well, again, I think that the main point is on targeting, right? So you're not going wholesale culture change and shift. It's we're going to target very specific areas of the culture. So let me talk a little bit more about
And maybe
some of the things. Yes,
And
please.
maybe Dana, just to build on what you're saying,
Yeah.
I think Misty, part of the way, at least Dana and I think about it internally, is that there are elements of the culture that have made us successful, right? So
Mhm.
if I think about the legacy of the company over many, 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 many years, there were points and times where we needed a certain culture because we were about to be bankrupt. There was other times where we needed a certain culture because just like every other team member, person who's on this webinar today, we were facing the challenge of how do you send 33,000 team members home and still have an enterprise that needs to run and service all of our global customers. So at each of those intervals, there's elements of your culture that actually have made you successful as a company. And so I really like and appreciate the way Dana's thinking about it, because it is honoring what's worked in your culture, but then finding those new amplification points that you've got to start building out because the environment around you has changed, right? And I've talked about this idea of AI at the edge, but there's other elements environmentally that for many, many companies are changing, right? Think about the tariffs, think about the geopolitical situation.
Mhm.
All of those drive elements in all of our cultures as a company that actually require us to continue to re-amplify certain elements while still honoring other elements that have made us very, very successful.
Yeah. And I think by taking that approach, you end up with a momentum, right, and an excitement. The worry that you experience with change can very well get in the way of that change. And so, really framing these things in terms of the go forward and let's take what we have and let's build on it. It really does create a whole um, new excitement and energy around the future, which I'm excited about. Let me just give you a bit of a sense of some of the things that we've been doing to try and get the organization moving in this direction. Now, with that, I am going to caveat this whole thing by saying we are right in the middle of this.
Mhm.
So if I would definitely say that we are learning as we go, and we have learned a lot over the last year that I've been in role, and I'm sure we are going to be learning a great deal more, and then adapting to that learning. So, but one of the first things that happened, Chris talked about our North Star, and that got established, I think last summer, it was in the summertime, that was established and began to be communicated to the organization. The first big element here was a recognition that leadership needed to be aligned. There needed to be a very strong sense of we know what the North Star is, and we know individually how the part we play in executing and getting to that North Star. So of course you had our town hall meetings, we had a variety of communication mechanisms that were all kind of aligned to make sure that that message started going out, right? In addition, we established a couple of additional processes. One is called the Executive Leadership Experience. It was pulling together some key senior vice presidents of the organization to get some alignment around their individual contributions, recognizing that these are individuals who are responsible for very large and important chunks of the business. And so making sure that that leadership group was very well aligned to our objective and the part that they play was one of the key objectives of the executive leadership experience. So again, sort of flowing from the very top to that next layer. And then we had what we called the transformation journey, which was an experience that was targeted at, then the next layer down, about the top 120 or so of leaders across the organization, where again, there was emphasis put around the North Star and where we needed to go as an organization. And really an experience crafted and designed to get individuals thinking about their own contribution and their own leadership vision for how they were going to push this thing forward. Coming out of that as well were some key initiatives that we were then able to align around areas of weakness, areas of gap that have been identified over time. So that leadership alignment piece has been really, really critical. There's been a lot of follow-up to that as well from the time it was kicked off. A variety of activities have taken place to bring that group back together and kind of look at progress and have additional discussions and make adjustments as a result of it as well. As I said, we have had a leadership transition right in the middle of this. So there was a bit of a shift needed there as well as we began to understand what our new president and CEO was going to be focusing on. So I mentioned before that there have been gaps identified over time. And the gaps, so where did that understanding come from? Well, there are a few things that we've done that have been unique over the last year. We have a regular annual engagement survey, as many organizations do. Our survey is benchmarked and trended over multiple years, so it is something we look at as a key indicator of how we're doing in a variety of different areas, of course. Now, a couple of adjustments we've made to our analytics around this have been really approaching the data set with some strategic questions in mind, rather than just saying, because a lot of us will get survey data and we'll say, oh, okay, well, that's interesting, that's high, that's low. What's the survey telling us? And our approach has been a little bit different in that we still do that. We still get the trended data. It still tells us kind of where we are relative to these other things. But this time around, Chris and the MT, as they have their discussions and we're beginning to talk about things we're seeing, even noise in the organization that we hear, we're able to then approach that data set differently because we come at it now with very specific questions. Like what are the data telling us about X or Y? And as you can imagine, in some of those cases, there weren't items on the survey to measure those things very specifically. So it was a moving into the qualitative data, the comments that we receive, and we got 17,000 comments overall, I think 14,000 of which were actually usable. But that's a lot of comments to read through. If you've ever been responsible for an organizational survey, it is a nightmare. And your ability to kind of accurately capture your learnings from all of that reading is extremely difficult to do. But combining these strategic questions with some of our newer AI enhanced analysis really has made this process much, much better. Now, I'm not saying, well, we just took all of our comments and we stuck them in ChatGPT or in Copilot and said, tell us what this says, right? You could do that. You definitely could do that. And if you've ever tried something like that, you don't always get the best result. It may tell you some things, but it doesn't really give you the best results. So our analytics team within HR has been absolutely fantastic. We've got some data scientists inside of the analytics team who have some expertise in scripting and really working on those very strategically oriented prompts that go into the AI. And as a result, we're able to take these focus areas, run them through the data set, and we get some remarkable insight from the comments that come back, and we're able to identify some key patterns that start to identify gaps that go beyond just operational gaps to cultural gaps, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, we have, for example, comments come in about bureaucracy, processes being too bureaucratic. Well, with these analyses, we can dig very deeply into our data set to say, okay, which processes,
Mhm.
where exactly are they seeing this bureaucracy? Where exactly is this slowing us down? And then you can go one step further in depth and you can say, all right, well, does it give me any sense of why we're bureaucratic? Because that's where culture is. Because we could go in and clear out all the bureaucracy if we made the decision to do it. We could go in and strip out all the complexity. But the cultural elements are going to put all that complexity back in over time.
Mhm.
So so one of the things that emerged from the data in the analysis was, well, our company in general, because of the industries that we operate in, we have become very risk averse. And to overcome that, we put in place a lot of process steps and a lot of checklists and a lot of bureaucracy gets put in. And so you could clean out all of that, but eventually, if you're not addressing the fundamental cultural attributes, you're going to be just adding more complexity on over time. So that was recognized. So the data mining that we did has been extremely enlightening in that regard. And stop there and see if Chris has anything to add here, because I think he's really been the driver here at getting underneath the data
Mhm.
to the greatest extent possible.
No, I think you've summarized it really well, Dana. I think the challenge is, and for all of us, right, that are practitioners in this area, is yeah, you can look at the pluses and minuses and what the trend is over a period of time, and you can go do focus groups and get more verbatim comments. But how do you bring all that together in a storyline to understand culturally what is it we need to go focus on, and then how do we do that over an extended period of time? Because it's not just a one-time change of, oh, I'm going to remove this checklist. To Dana's point, especially for NXP, we operate in the automotive industry. And I for sure want NXP to be super risk adverse because you impact my ability every day when I drive my car. But how do we then do it in the most effective way? How do we do it in the most efficient way without losing sight of the importance of we deliver safe and secure products to our customers? That's a requirement for us to be successful.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. So
absolutely. Yeah.
the challenge that you guys have helped identify, thank you for that, are these technological shifts, your leadership transition, which all organizations go through at some point, and then the cultural inertia, which you've actually leveraged your leadership transition to create momentum. And then looking at these steps and how you begin to change culture quickly without discarding what made you strong in the first place, I want to go back to that North Star, because that's something that we have a conversation around a lot, especially, once a year, end of year, moving into the next. Many organizations set one, and very few actually operationalize it. What is one hard trade-off that you've had to make to keep unstoppable from being just a slogan? Chris or Dana?
Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, I was mentioning this to a group I was talking to earlier today, that to some extent, I mean, just the word unstoppable, when we use words like that, they are compelling. I mean, when you really think about it, I think when I think unstoppable, I think, a juggernaut of some kind that's just
Mm.
powering through, and there's no force that's actually going to keep it from getting where it wants to go, right? I mean, it's just so big, so influential, so powerful that really it just continues going. And I think about history of industry and some of the companies in the past that you look at and you just go, yeah, there were points in time at which they were just, I mean, taking on the world, and there was nothing you were going to do. I think about an Apple. You think about, Microsoft. You think about some of these companies that, while they've had their ups and downs, they're kind of the only game in town at some point in time. That doesn't always stay that way. It's kind of interesting how that happens. But our challenge and a lot of the questions that came up originally when we were working through this leadership alignment element had to do with, I don't understand the strategy.
Mm,
I don't understand unstoppable. What do we mean by unstoppable,
mhm,
right? And as we've explored that question, at least I've come to realize that in some ways it's very hard to define without defining what makes you stoppable. And as we begin to look at through the data that, again, I'm mentioning, and trying to drive down to those cultural elements, that's when you begin to say, okay, unstoppable means, at least to some extent, overcoming that. Okay, that's one, right? Um, so I think the definition is very important, but I think you can also get really wrapped around the axle of defining unstoppable, when in reality, you need to know what the gaps are that are making you stoppable to truly understand that. Sounds a little circular, I admit it, but the fact of the matter is when we're dealing with terms like this, um, it's what you run into. It is, I think we all know what we think unstoppable means, but if you're going to operationalize it, you've really got to know what's getting in your way to
mhm,
operationalize it.
And
Okay.
maybe to build on Dana's point, I would tell you, Misty, a couple of things we've been working through, and part of it has also been benefited by this leadership change. And the way Dana and I think about it is, listen, every time you have a crisis or you have a major change or a major shift, don't let it go by without getting leverage out of it. So we
Mhm,
also see this as a positive opportunity because
mhm,
from an HR perspective, from a culture perspective, we know we can leverage this as a really momentous or momentum boost for us as an organization. So
mhm,
a couple of things we've really been focusing on to try to get to be unstoppable has been clarity around ownership in the organization. One of the things that we found, and Dana's done a number of enterprise-wide kind of assessment processes, more from an organizational development perspective,
mhm,
where we see this duplication of ownership and or lack of clarity of ownership. And so creating that clarity in the organization with our leaders, and think of the top leaders that report to the CEO, has been really, really impactful. I would tell you the second thing that we're in, I wouldn't tell you I'm not going to say we've done it. I say we're in the middle of it. We've tried to change the context of the discussions that we have, and we've introduced this concept of being okay to have a spicy dialogue, especially with
mhm,
CEO direct reports. In fact, there was one point where we sat in a circle as a leadership team, and we put a bowl of spicy peppers in the middle of the circle to reinforce the idea we want to have a spicy dialogue. Not that we want to personally attack each other, but we
mhm,
want to be able to have the right level of conversation for the best outcome, but do so without it being a personal attack. And so we've termed this idea that we use in the organization now called spicy dialogues, or we're going to have a spicy dialogue, which means, hey, we're going to have a really intense conversation. Nobody should walk away with their feelings being hurt. Nobody should see it as a personal attack. And that's something I would tell you we're in the midst of doing. So we've tried it a couple times, and we've gotten our feet wet in this idea of spicy dialogue. But that's how you start getting out of the inertia that's in the organization to have
mhm.
the right discussions on the right topics to ultimately get to this idea of unstoppable.
yeah.
I love that. So Eugene, whenever I put a jalapeno emoji in my screen next time, you know what's coming.
Good idea.
Um, I love it. I love it.
It's amazing
So
what the visual will do for you. It gets
Mhm.
your mindset really
Yeah,
prepared, right?
yeah.
absolutely.
And that
Um,
and that idea has filtered down through the organization. So it started with our MT, a CEO and staff, and then from that time, it has filtered down. And I think if you think about some of the frameworks related to crucial conversations and those kinds of things. It's
Exactly.
really on the order of having the right dialogues, right?
Same.
Mhm.
Yeah.
In a productive way, of course.
Exactly.
Right.
But what exactly? How do you get rid of that emotion and have that right? And the crucial conversation connection is a great one, Dana.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and just kind of building on that, and this is for you, Chris. So, we talked about our bowl of spicy peppers and breaking silos, which sounds amazing in theory, but can be difficult to do without proper psychological safety and things like that. What concrete mechanisms have you put in place that a CEO or a fellow CHRO could replicate tomorrow?
Well, I think the piece that I would pull from, and Eugene's kind of had it in a bit of the chat here. I've seen that he's
Hmm.
putting it in. It really is getting alignment of that team, of that top team, around your purpose, right? What are you here for? What do you exist for as an organization? And what do you exist for as a CEO and the CEO's direct reports, right? There's a purpose of that team. There's only certain topics and elements that that team can solve, and they can only solve it if you have some alignment on what I just would describe as the operating norms, right? So what we've done to spend time as an organization is, number one, develop that purpose. Number two, make sure that we know why do we exist. So there's the purpose of the firm or the purpose of the company, the why do we exist as a team, because you're not just there to do report outs, you're there for an actual reason. And then what are the operating norms that help you have the right types of conversations, right? So that for us is the way we've thought about it. The
Hmm.
last thing I would say, and I don't know if you noticed it on the values that Dana showed. When we created those values, you see that we very intentionally put a foundation underneath our values. So you see, we have a set of 5 values: innovation, expertise, collaboration, ownership, and growth. But those values are always described as being built upon the strong foundation of trust and respect. So that way, as a team, anytime you get into the spice dialogue, you say, well, wait a minute, this is all built upon our expectation of a strong foundation of trust and respect. And that was very intentional with not just the CEO, but actually all of my peers that report to the CEO. Was, we want this foundation to be in place because then it enables the actual values, the 5 values that you see there in what we call our values house.
Hmm. Yes, I remember you guys doing an incredible amount of work a couple of years ago, a really transformative journey, connecting behaviors specifically to values and really creating that as your foundation. Um, Data, I want to go back to that incredible stat of 14,000 comments. How are you using that data differently in this transformation? And what does it mean to operationalize culture in this context?
Yeah, and that's a really good segue too into kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about. But let me
Hmm.
let me go back on the qualitative data, which is always a challenge in every large engagement survey. Um, the goal there is to really sort through the noise and get to um, the themes that act as threads, that sort of connect the issues. There's always a quantitative element to surveys, and that gives you a little bit of a direction. And we always like to look at the trends, right? To say, here's, we're up from last year, we're down from last year. We think this might be a challenge, but to understand the why of your up or down or any kind of a gap that you're exploring, you really have to go to the qualitative data. So again, it's being very, very strategic in our look at those data rather than trying to boil the whole ocean. Um, Really getting very, very specific in our queries and our prompts, and using AI in particular to help get past that hump of just the volume of it, because it is so big. And if your organization is, I mean, we're 30,000 plus, folks in our organization. It's going to yield that kind of a data set for absolutely sure that it will. Now, there are some other ways to go about, looking at culture. And you asked the question about operationalizing culture. And I use that term very specifically. So the goal is to really see, not just to be able to describe the culture that you want, but you need to describe how culture shows up in how we actually operate, in how we make decisions, in how we reward people, in what we reward people for, in in how we set our goals. And there are many other, how we develop people, what we tell them, how we recruit people. I mean, you just go across the spectrum. HR processes and systems are all over it. So um, we need to define how our current culture shows up. And we're right now in the middle of a very specialized assessment with a partner who measures culture in that way. They actually have they've been in business for a long time, and they've done some indexing for a long period of time around how different cultural characteristics, in other words, how culture is operationalized and shows up, how it relates very specifically to organizational outcomes like EBITDA, other key financial measures, revenue growth, et cetera. So they're able to essentially help you define what aspects of your culture are helping or hindering you getting to those key outcomes, whatever KPIs are most important to you, actually. And we think that is going to be a great add. Like I said, we're right in the middle of that assessment at the moment, to really helping us define and get very specific about those targeted changes that we want to make. Like I said, we're not going to try and boil the ocean with culture. We're going to try to focus on how culture shows up in specific ways and how that can help us or hurt us in terms of reaching that North Star. And as I said, I think I mentioned before, there may be some aspects of our culture that we're actually very proud of that could be overused. And as a result, we end up in a place where where we're not getting to the outcomes we want. So we're in the middle of that assessment right now, and that will flow into a broader initiative that'll be a longer term look at kind of how do we make these changes, looking at some of our processes and systems, how we support the kind of change we want. So we're really excited about that, but we're just barely getting started, kind of in that assessment and diagnosis phase. But we are pulling together all the data that we've collected and utilized and analyzed through this whole process. This will just be a nice kind of topper on the cake to help us really pull it all together. So.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, Dana, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know you are in the midst of it, so that's a pretty special place to be speaking from. We're going to move to Q&A. If you guys want to drop your questions or your thoughts, comments in chat, and just to put it in context with our working theme for 26 Culturati Summit, our working theme is courageous leadership, in which I think dovetails nicely to this, and naming a bold North Star and making those tough calls to pursue it. Purpose, as Eugene listed, keeping that North Star anchored in the why. The work matters for people, customers, and the future. Clarity, aligning senior leaders around the shared direction so that energy isn't wasted in silos. Agency, equipping, in your case, those 120 VPs to own their personal visions and lead change in their spheres. Speed, executing fast enough to stay competitive while protecting trust and quality. And so I would say that, yeah, absolutely, culture does become unstoppable when leaders lead with courage, stay anchored in purpose, align with clarity, empower agency, and move with disciplined speed. So any final thoughts before we take questions?
No, I think you've summarized it up really well, Misty. And I think for us, it's really about how we get the leaders to exhibit the behaviors. How do we continue to reinforce and demonstrate this is what the North Star really means? And as Dana says, we're in the middle of that transformation. And lastly, I would say Dana and I like to leverage any challenge, any transformation, any crisis. How do we ride that wave a little bit and use it to reinforce what's most important in the organization? And so we're fortunate today. We've got a CEO transition, which creates a wave for us to ride, and we have an overall evolution in the industry that we work in that also gives us a nice wave to ride.
And I would
Hmm.
just add one additional thing, and that is, and hopefully it came through in some of our discussion today, that you know we do not leverage the data that are already available to us nearly as much as we should. And I know that's been my experience in many of the places where I've worked. There's a lot of data that just sit there and it's rich and we can learn a lot from it. So that's something that has just become more and more apparent to me as we've worked through this is we can do more, we can learn more, we can understand more, and that can help give focus and focus to our effort.
Absolutely. And to Eugene's point, yes, our working theme is courageous leadership and trust, which in a leadership transition and in a volatile age in a polycrisis world, trust is absolutely foundational to having a healthy organization, productive workforce. So I think Dana, your last point works well with Sai's question here. What is your best advice in fostering a culture of courage and experimentation without demoralizing your team when things don't go as planned, which
Well,
happens all the time?
that's an absolutely great question because I think what they're getting at there with that question is that you want people to take chances, right? You want them to take intelligent risks. You want them to try new things. That's where innovation is born, is
Mhm.
by individual curiosity and a willingness to reach out and do something different. And so when I talk about how we reward people, I think the corollary to that and the flip side of it is what do we do when people fail? How do we talk to them when people fail? And making it to some extent okay to fail.
Mhm.
Huge caveat on that, right? Because the assumption there is that they've followed their processes, they've done their due diligence, and so as a result, it was just an idea that didn't work. Okay, we want to encourage that. All right. Ideally, every idea would work, but we know that that's not the way innovation happens. So I think part of it is really getting our leadership aligned around how we treat and even reward risk taking.
Mhm. Spicy peppers need not
Yeah.
always apply.
Yeah.
For you, Chris, from David, what internal guardrails have you created in the use of AI around ethical use, HR policy?
No, it's a great question, David. And as you can imagine, in a technology company, we want to be very careful about how team members use AI, right? So we initially went way to the extreme. We cut everything off, right? So internally, we put all the blocks in place and really did an education campaign with our team members to make sure they understood. Listen, if you go drop something in Chat GPT, just recognize that it is now public domain. And we actually saw companies out there where you could pull examples in. Samsung was one I remember, right, where a Samsung engineer took a bunch of their software code and actually put it in ChatGPT, and then it became part of the public domain. We established internally an AI council that isn't run actually by our IT organization. It has team members from the technology organization, from our ethics organization, as well as from our transformation team. And so we've kind of have this AI council. This group is helping us steer the way. So if I, as a team member, have a great idea and I want to do a use case with a specific software or a specific tool from an AI perspective, then I can get agreement and approval, go through kind of a simple click, click, click process to get alignment that I can use that tool and I can ultimately change the way of working or change the process internally to the company. We found that AI council to be super helpful because I don't just get the IT folks on it. I also get the technology folks, so the folks from R&D. I get the ethics team, and the leader of our ethics organization is involved in that. And that way we make sure that everybody has an equal view into what's happening and also can bring in their expertise for their specific area. So that's the way we've addressed it. I can imagine for all of us on this call, it's really a huge challenge, which is how do you protect your information, but give team members in your organization access to these great tools that ultimately will save them time and make them more efficient.
Thank you. David, hopefully that helped give a little framework there. Michael asked, as companies make leadership changes, how do you ensure that you do not fall into the trap of a culture centered on a particular leader? It needs to be an enterprise culture that can stand the test of time.
Yeah, Michael, I think it's a great point, and the way we look at it internally is exactly as you say, right? And as Dana says, there's things in your culture that have made you successful and that are super positive in your culture. It's a question of what does that new leader want to amplify, and that's been our guidance to our new leader as he's and by the way, our new leader is an internal promotion, so it's one of the members that was on the CEO staff, became president, and now in at the end of this month he will become our president and CEO, is to say, listen, you should look for what do you want to amplify, not change the entire culture, because you just can't do that. I can't change a 50-year history of a culture of an organization spread across 33,000 team members. But what you can identify is what are the 2 to 3 things that you really want to amplify that are needed today under your leadership to be successful. And that's how we kind of allow the carry forward of those things that are super, super impactful and positive in our culture, but also the things that need to be slightly adjusted to make us more effective and more successful today.
Final question, because we are at time. I know we could keep going, but Haynes
Mhm.
asked, when discussing culture and brainstorming implementing cultural transformation at NXP, how much does the US-based team consider and model concepts from NXP Netherlands?
So it's a great question, Haynes, because as a company, we actually are a Netherlands-based company.
Yeah.
But the advantage actually that we have is when I think about our leaders, so think of our top, that 120 that Dana talked about, we're a globally diverse set of 120 leaders. So we get the advantage, Dana and I get the advantage of, we don't just come and approach things from a US perspective, or said differently, even from a Silicon Valley perspective, the technology Silicon Valley view. What we get the advantage of doing is leveraging the diversity of our 120 leaders who are spread across Europe, across Asia, and across the Americas. And that group is so diverse that we don't get stuck in one specific pattern. Dana has a team of actual representatives from around the company that are executives that he uses. It's kind of this advisory council that Dana has, where he can go to that group and leverage their context and leverage their understanding from a culturally diverse perspective, so we don't get stuck in this either Netherlands view or US only view. It's a great question, Haynes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we are at time, Chris, Dana. Thank you again, and thank you all for joining us. We will be sending the recording and recap out by the end of the week, but happy Wednesday and a great rest of your weeks.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.